is Mallory and I will be presenting the concept map to the yes side of issue number 14. The article is titled, Is Full Inclusion of Disabled Students Desirable? By Richard A. Villa and Jacqueline 1000. The inclusion of disabled students requires commitment through a diverse organization such as a school with students and classrooms of diverse areas that will meet both the positive and negative aspects of learning. This can happen by administering leadership and collaborative roles to both teachers and administrators. The teachers and administrators can then show school-wide positive behavior support and discipline approaches. These leadership and collaborative roles lead to active involvement in both the schools and in the classrooms, which enhances the success of inclusive education. The inclusion of disabled students also requires creative thinking by the administrative staff. They can then communicate to educators and families the best way to facilitate the inclusion. This would then show the differences between disabled and non-disabled students, while also emphasizing the weaknesses and strengths that each group may have. The weaknesses and strengths are overseen by the LRE, which is the Least Restrictive Environment. The LRE was implemented by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. This law states that children with disabilities have the right to an education in the least restrictive environment. The LRE altogether helps to enhance the success of inclusive education. The inclusion of disabled students also requires effective classroom strategies such as group activities through partner-based and project-based learning. With both of these kinds of collaboration, we allow a response to diversity which enhances the success of inclusive education.
West, and I'm going to be discussing the V diagram from issue number 14 by Richard A. Villa and Jacqueline S. 1000. Our focus question asks, is full inclusion of disabled students desirable? And our event is making inclusive education work. In this article, they argue that inclusive education can be successful as long as certain variables are met. This can lead to a successful program for students and teachers. Mallory has already reviewed the concept map and the key concepts about making inclusive education work. These key concepts can be found on the lower left corner of the V. I am now going to discuss the principles and records about this article. The principles are found above the key concepts and the records are found on the right side of the V. Our principles discuss some of the ways that schools can implement a successful program for inclusion of all students. These principles are followed by records from the text that support them. The first principle is that inclusion of disabled students requires commitment through a diverse organization by leadership and collaborative roles, which lead to active involvement, which enhances the success of inclusive education. This is shown in the record on page 257, which says, for inclusive education to work, educators must become effective and efficient collaborative team members. Our second principle is that creative thinking shows the differences between disabled and non-disabled individuals, emphasizing their strengths in the least restrictive environment. The record that shows this is on page 254 and says that as an educator, you are philosophically committed to student diversity. You appreciate that learning differences are natural and positive. The next principle is that inclusion requires effective classroom strategies such as group activities through partner learning and project-based learning, which allows a response to diversity. This record is stated on page 258 and says that, for instance, in a study conducted by the National Center on Educational Restructuring and Inclusion, the majority of the district implementing inclusive education reported cooperative learning as the most important instructional strategy supporting inclusive education. The final principle shows inclusion of disabled students requires many aspects such as commitment, creative thinking, and effective classroom strategies. And the final record on page 260 states, inclusive education is a general education initiative, not another add-on school reform unrelated to other general education initiatives. It incorporates demonstrated general education, best practices, and it redefines educators' and students' roles and responsibilities as creative and collaborative partners. As you can see, there are many ways to create a successful school with inclusion for all students. Now I will move to the top right-hand corner to discuss the knowledge and value claims. After assessing our focus question, we have found that the knowledge claim is inclusive education will be successful if there are connections with best practices, visionary leadership, redefined roles, collaboration, and adult support. In addition to our knowledge claims, we have developed value claims that state teachers understand that differences in learning are inevitable and should be trained to work collaboratively with students and other educators to ensure the successful inclusion of all students in the least restrictive environment. We have come to the conclusion that the theory of this article is that research has shown that inclusive education can be successful as long as 5 important variables have been met.